I remember the exact moment my stomach dropped. It was a Thursday morning in March, the kind where the Atlanta air feels like it can't decide if it's spring or winter. I was in my office at Whitman & Sons Logistics, sipping my second coffee, when our accountant, Ruth, walked in holding a manila folder like it was toxic. "Charles," she said softly, "we have a problem." Inside were 3 invoices, each stamped paid, each for services I supposedly authorized to a shell company I'd never heard of. The signatures were mine, except they weren't. The amounts? Small enough to avoid raising suspicion, but large enough to sting. "Someone's skimming," Ruth whispered. "And it's pointing to you." It took me all of 10 seconds to spot what she hadn't. The handwriting wasn't mine, the ink strokes too heavy, too deliberate. My brother Greg's brand of arrogance was all over it. I felt my pulse in my throat. Greg wasn't just my younger brother, he was my business partner, my blood. We built this company from the ground up. And now, staring at those forged papers, I realized something got deep. He wasn't trying to steal from the business. He was trying to destroy me. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are viewing from. Kindly hit the like and subscribe to hear more real stories about family loyalty and betrayal. They might just change how you see your own relationships. My name is Charles Whitman. I'm 53 years old. I've always been the dependable one. Ask anyone in my family. If a pipe burst at midnight, they called me. If a cousin's kid needed tuition, I found a way to pay it. When my father's heart failed in 2004, I put my own savings on hold to keep the business and the family afloat. Greg, on the other hand. Greg was the charmer. 5 years younger, with that permanent half-smile that could disarm even the most suspicious client. He had a knack for talking his way into opportunities, but an even greater knack for letting someone else do the heavy lifting once he got there. Our parents had always said we made a good team. I handled operations, payroll, client relations, the unglamorous stuff that kept Whitman & Sons Logistics running. Greg? He schmoozed. He took clients golfing, hosted dinners at steakhouses, and made everyone feel like they were part of something big. In the early years, it worked. He'd bring in new contracts, I'd make sure they got delivered. But over time, I noticed the balance shifting. His new contracts were fewer, his lunches longer, his business trips more like extended vacations. Then there were the urgent requests for money. Sometimes for the business, a supplier who needed a deposit early, a client requiring a last-minute dinner. But sometimes it was personal, a down payment on a new car, a temporary loan to cover his mortgage after a bad quarter. I told myself I was helping him through rough patches. That's what brothers do, right? But the rough patches never ended, they just changed shape. If I'm being honest, Greg had always been our mother's favorite. She swore she didn't play favorites, but everyone could see it. Greg was the baby. The charming one. The one who could do no wrong even when he clearly did. When we were kids, I'd get grounded for missing curfew by 10 minutes. Greg could come home smelling like beer, laugh it off, and be rewarded with a plate of pancakes in the morning. That dynamic followed us into adulthood. At family gatherings, when Greg bragged about closing deals I knew he barely touched, everyone beamed with pride. When I talked about managing payroll or negotiating freight rates, eyes glazed over. It wasn't that they didn't value me. It was that they expected me to keep things running. I was the safety net. The one who would pick up the slack, no matter how heavy it got. And Greg knew it. About a year before the betrayal, I started noticing discrepancies in our expense reports. Small amounts at first, $200 here, $500 there, marked as client entertainment or miscellaneous supplier fees. Normally, I'd let Greg handle the entertainment budget. But the receipts were vague. Some didn't exist at all. I brought it up casually over lunch. "Hey, Greg, this dinner with Atlantic Freight Solutions, what was that about?" "We don't even work with them." He didn't even flinch. "Oh, that? Just a networking thing. Might open a door down the line." Then he took another bite of his steak and changed the subject to the Falcons game. I wanted to press, but I let it go. I told myself I was overthinking it. Then there was the incident with the office assistant, Marlene. She came to me one Friday, flustered. "Mr. Whitman," she said, "Greg asked me to process a wire transfer for a vendor, but the bank account's under a personal name, not a company." I asked Greg about it, and he gave me the same smooth answer. "It's a guy I know. Trust me, it's fine." Again, I let it slide. The truth was, I'd been carrying more than just Greg's workload. I was also supporting him financially in ways I didn't like to admit. Our company paid him a generous salary, but his lifestyle was bigger than his paycheck. The golf club membership, the designer suits, the weekend getaways with his wife, Julia, they all added up. I covered for him more times than I could count. If a check was late, I'd move money from my own account to cover it. If a supplier threatened to pull out, I'd negotiate a payment plan, sometimes paying the first installment myself. Greg always promised to make it right. He never did. The thing about being dependable is that people start to see it as your job, not your choice. Greg didn't thank me anymore. He just expected it. And the more I did for him, the more invisible I became. The months before the betrayal were strangely calm. Too calm, in hindsight. Greg was unusually attentive, offering to help with contracts, showing up to meetings on time, even suggesting we should hang out more, just the two of us. At the time, I thought maybe he'd turned a corner. Maybe all those years of covering for him had finally sunk in. But there were subtle signs, odd glances between him and Ruth, our accountant. Closed-door conversations that stopped when I walked in. A couple of emails from suppliers I didn't recognize, forwarded to me by mistake. And then there was the biggest one, a mysterious uptick in petty cash withdrawals from our business account. When I asked Greg about it, he shrugged. Probably Marlene buying office supplies. You know how she is. Something in my gut told me it wasn't Marlene. But I ignored it. I told myself we were in a good place. Looking back, I can see the trap forming. Greg started delegating certain vendor payments to me, but only the ones that were routine and easy to track. The more complex, less familiar transactions? He handled those himself. Then came the day Ruth asked me to sign off on a batch of invoices she said Greg had already approved. I glanced at them quickly, saw nothing unusual, and signed. That was my mistake. Because the next time Ruth came to me, she had that manila folder in her hands. And my brother's signature, my forged signature, was staring back at me. The stage was set. And I had no idea the performance had already begun. Ruth shut the office door behind her before she sat down across from me. She wasn't the type for dramatics, so the way she handled that manila folder, like it contained anthrax, told me all I needed to know. She laid it on my desk and slid it forward. "Charles," she said, lowering her voice, "I think you need to see this." 3 invoices, all made out to Dawson Freight Solutions, sat on top. The amounts weren't huge, $3,200, $4,750, and $5,100, but enough to make a dent. All marked paid. All bearing my name in loopy black ink. Except it wasn't my signature. I studied them for a long moment, my ears buzzing. The strokes were wrong. The spacing between the letters was too wide. My own signature was tight, efficient, born from years of signing hundreds of checks. This looked deliberate, almost like a caricature of my handwriting. Where did these come from? I asked. They came through Greg, she said, her face unreadable. He gave them to me last week, told me you'd approved them. I didn't think twice, but when I was reconciling accounts this morning, something felt off. Dawson Freight Solutions isn't in our system. I flipped the pages over, scanning for details. The address listed was a P.O. box. No phone number. No email. No company registration I recognized. My gut twisted. "No," I said, almost laughing. "Greg wouldn't. This has to be some kind of mistake." Ruth didn't laugh. "Charles, I know you and Greg are close. But I've been in accounting for 22 years. This is fraud. And right now, the paper trail points to you. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. That Greg might be lazy, reckless, even manipulative, but not this. Not deliberately framing me. But as I sat there, the last year replayed in my head like an old film reel. The unexplained petty cash withdrawals. The vague vendor names. The closed-door conversations. The calm before the storm. "Oh my God," I murmured. "Do you want me to escalate this to the board?" she asked carefully. "No," I said, too quickly. "Not yet." When Ruth left, I shut the blinds and sat there in silence. My pulse was hammering. My own brother. The kid I taught to ride a bike, the guy I'd covered for in front of Mom more times than I could count, was trying to ruin me. And not just ruin me, destroy everything I'd built. If the board saw those invoices without context, it wouldn't matter that they were forged. I'd be suspended pending investigation. My reputation in the logistics industry, built over 30 years, would be gone overnight. Meanwhile, Greg would stand there in his designer suit, shaking his head, telling everyone how heartbroken he was that I'd betrayed the family. The thought made my jaw ache. I've always believed in two kinds of problem solving, the quick fix and the long game. This wasn't a problem I could duct tape my way out of. I needed proof, not just that I was innocent, but that Greg was guilty. And not just of this. I wanted to know everything. Every cent he'd taken. Every lie he'd told. Every skeleton he'd shoved into a closet and prayed would stay there. I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. "Marcus Reed Investigations," came the voice on the other end. "Marcus," I said, "it's Charles Whitman." A pause. Then a low chuckle. "Haven't heard from you since, what, '08? When your warehouse got hit by that insurance scam?" "That's the one," I said. "And you nailed the guy in under a week. What's the problem this time?" "My brother," I said flatly. "I think he's setting me up for fraud. I need proof, enough to bury him if I have to." Marcus whistled. "Family cases are messy, Charles. You sure you want to go down that road?" "I'm already on it," I said. Marcus's first piece of advice was simple. Don't let Greg know I suspected anything. If he thought I was on to him, he'd cover his tracks, or worse, accelerate whatever he had planned. For the next week, I played my role. I laughed at his dumb jokes in meetings. I nodded along when he pitched vague expansion opportunities to the board. I even agreed to grab drinks with him after work one night, listening to him ramble about a supposed deal in Florida. All the while, Marcus was digging. He had Ruth quietly pull every vendor payment Greg had handled in the last 2 years. He traced the bank accounts those payments went to. By the third day, he had a pattern. "Your brother's got a network of shell companies," Marcus told me over the phone. "Most of them set up under fake names, but all registered to the same P.O. boxes. Money goes in from your business account, sits for a few days, then gets withdrawn in cash. How much are we talking? Conservatively? 300 grand. Maybe more." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles ached. Marcus suggested we feed Greg an opportunity, something too tempting for him to resist. So Ruth created a fake vendor account for Kingston Freight Services, complete with a website and phone number Marcus controlled. I mentioned the company to Greg in passing, saying they were offering a steep discount on container storage. His eyes lit up. Within 2 days, Greg had submitted an invoice from Kingston Freight for $7,800, approved in my name. That was all I needed. Even with the evidence stacking up, I couldn't shake the pit in my stomach. Every night, I'd go home and stare at the ceiling, replaying every moment I defended Greg over the years. The time Dad caught him borrowing from a petty cash drawer and I swore it was my fault. The time a client accused him of double billing and I smoothed it over, paying the refund out of my own pocket. All of it had led here. I started wondering if Greg had ever respected me at all, or if, from the very beginning, he'd just seen me as a safety net he could cut when it suited him. Marcus's final recommendation was bold. Don't just confront Greg. Expose him in front of the board with irrefutable proof. That way, Marcus said, he can't spin it. He can't run to family, claim you're framing him. Everyone will see the truth in real time. It made sense. But it also meant playing nice with Greg for a little while longer, knowing exactly what he was doing behind my back. So I smiled. I shook his hand in the hallway. I even thanked him for handling the Dawson freight invoices when Ruth was within earshot. He grinned like the cat who'd swallowed the canary. A week before the shareholder meeting, Greg surprised me. He came into my office, shut the door, and tossed a file onto my desk. "What's this?" I asked. "Ruth's been talking to you," he said. Not a question, a statement. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You've been poking around my files." My chest tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." He leaned in. "Be careful, Charles. You start making accusations without proof, and it'll be your neck on the chopping block." It was a bluff, but a good one. I kept my face neutral. "Noted," I said, and slid the file back to him. When he left, I called Marcus. "We need to move faster." The night before the shareholder meeting, Marcus delivered a thick binder to my house. Inside was everything: bank statements, shell company registrations, forged invoices, including the Kingston freight trap we'd set. There was no doubt. Greg had been embezzling for years, funneling money through a web of fake vendors, and had recently tried to pin it all on me. I barely slept. Not because I was nervous, but because I was rehearsing exactly how I'd dismantle him in front of everyone who mattered. By the time I walked into the boardroom the next morning, the fear was gone. The disbelief was gone. All that was left was a cold, precise focus. Greg didn't know it yet, but in less than an hour, the life he'd built on lies was going to collapse, and I was going to be the one pulling the thread. Greg was already in the boardroom when I arrived, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place. The other board members filtered in: Janet from operations, Carter from legal, Howard representing outside investors. Greg made his rounds, shaking hands, cracking jokes. He was in his element, oblivious to the fact that this was his last performance. When everyone was settled, the chairman, Martin Hale, called the meeting to order. "We have a full agenda today," he began, "but before we dive into quarterly reports, Charles, I understand you have an urgent matter?" I glanced at Greg. He gave a faint, patronizing nod, as if to say, "Go ahead, big brother. See where this gets you." About 6 weeks ago, I began. A set of invoices crossed my desk, 3, in fact, made out to Dawson Freight Solutions. All marked as approved by me. The problem was, I'd never seen them before. A ripple of curiosity passed around the table. Greg's smile tightened. At first, I continued, I assumed it was a mistake. But when I looked deeper, I found something troubling. Dawson Freight isn't in our vendor system. It has no registered address, no corporate filings, no employees. Just a P.O. box in Savannah. I'll let that sink in. Then I flipped open the binder and slid a copy of the first invoice toward Martin, who passed it to Janet, who passed it to Howard. Greg leaned forward, voice casual but strained. "Charles, this is highly irregular." "Agreed," I said sharply. Which is why I had an independent investigator review our vendor payments for the last 2 years. That's when I pulled the thread. One by one, I laid the evidence out on the table, literally. Bank statements showing payments to shell companies. Corporate registrations linking those companies to the same handful of P.O. boxes. Withdrawal slips showing cash drawn within days of deposits. Over the past 24 months, I said, more than $320,000 has been siphoned out of this company into entities that do not exist, except on paper. Greg's face was a mask now, lips pressed thin. But I saw the flicker in his eyes, the one that said, "How much does he know?" And the authorizing signatures on these payments? I held up a copy of one. Forgeries. Bad ones. I passed the forged Dawson Freight invoice to Carter from legal. Our handwriting analyst confirmed these aren't mine. The spacing, the pen pressure, even the slant of the letters, it's a match to one person. I looked straight at Greg. Silence. He finally spoke. This is absurd. You think I'd steal from my own family? My own company? I let him talk. He rambled about loyalty, about sacrifice, about how he'd bled for this business. The performance was almost convincing, if you didn't know the truth. When he paused for breath, I slid the Kingston Freight invoice across the table. This was submitted 2 weeks ago, I said, and approved, again, in my name. Kingston Freight does not exist either. But this time, Greg, it was our account. Our phone line. Our P.O. box. I could feel the board members leaning forward, the air thick with tension. You walked right into it, I said quietly. Greg's voice rose, cracking at the edges. You set me up. You're framing me to cover your own mistakes. That was his toll, the shift from calm denial to wild accusation. I'd seen it in him since we were kids. It was the same tone he used when Dad caught him with a broken window and he swore I'd done it. Only this time, there were no parents to mediate. Only shareholders who had just watched him get caught red-handed. Marcus had prepared me for this moment. Don't argue, he'd said. Just present the facts and let them connect the dots. So I didn't answer him. Facilitated through falsified vendor accounts and forged authorization signatures. Total verified loss, $327,450, with potential additional exposure pending full audit. The room was dead silent except for the shuffle of papers. Howard was the first to speak. Greg, do you have any explanation for this? Greg opened his mouth, closed it again. He looked at me, at the binder, at the board. The fight was draining out of him. Not because he believed I'd beaten him, but because he realized everyone else did. Martin cleared his throat. Greg, given the severity of these findings, I'm recommending immediate suspension pending legal review. The shareholders will vote on permanent removal once we have the audit results. Greg shot to his beat. This is a joke. You're all sheep. He's been manipulating you. Sit down, Martin said, his tone cold enough to cut steel. Before you make this worse. Greg hesitated, then stormed out, slamming the boardroom door so hard the glass rattled. The rest of the meeting was a blur. The board agreed to lock Greg out of all systems, freeze his expense accounts, and initiate a forensic audit. Carter said we'd need to involve law enforcement. Martin agreed. When the meeting adjourned, I stayed behind, packing the binder back into my briefcase. My hands were steady now. No shaking. No adrenaline crash. Ruth appeared in the doorway. It's done? It's done, I said. She stepped in and closed the door. He's going to come after you. I know, I said. But he won't have the tools anymore. By the time I got home that evening, my phone was buzzing with texts from relatives. Greg had been making calls, pleading his case, painting himself as the victim. I ignored them all except one from Aunt Margaret. I never thought I'd see the day. But I believe you, Charles. I poured a drink and sat by the window, watching the sunset over the city. Somewhere out there, Greg was probably pacing his penthouse, calling lawyers, blaming everyone but himself. I didn't feel joy. Not yet. Just a deep, quiet certainty that the balance had shifted. The next morning, Marcus called. You made the papers. Sure enough, the Atlanta Business Chronicle had a short piece about internal fraud allegations at Whitman Logistics, naming Greg as the suspended executive. They didn't mention me at all. That's the thing about sunlight, Marcus said. It doesn't just disinfect, it scorches. I laughed for the first time in weeks. 2 days later, he tried one more move. A cease and desist letter arrived from his lawyer, accusing me of defamation and malicious entrapment. Carter read it, snorted, and tossed it in the shred pile. He's bluffing, Carter said. If he files, discovery will destroy him. That was the moment I knew it was over, not because the legal fight was won, but because Greg's weapon of choice was fear, and I wasn't afraid anymore. The audit wrapped 2 weeks later. The total theft was worse than we thought, $412,000 over 4 years, spread across 11 shell companies. The findings were turned over to the district attorney. When the arrest warrant came through, Greg didn't show up at the office to collect his things. He sent a mover. I watched from my window as they loaded his framed diplomas, golf trophies, and leather desk chair into a truck. It felt final. Standing there, I realized something important. I hadn't just beaten Greg. I'd dismantled the mythology he'd built around himself, the charming younger brother, the business prodigy, the golden son. Now, in the eyes of the people who mattered, he was exactly what I discovered him to be, a thief who'd underestimated the man he thought was his safety net. And that was the real victory. When the movers came to clear out Greg's office, I didn't watch. I'd seen enough of him unraveling over the past weeks to last me a lifetime. Instead, I sat in my study, quietly flipping through the final audit report Marcus had delivered, the pages worn from my repeated readings. The numbers were staggering, over $400,000 siphoned off through shell companies, fake vendors, and forged signatures. A web of deceit so intricate it would make a lesser man dizzy. But not me. I'd seen the whole thing coming, piece by piece. The board had voted unanimously to remove Greg from the company. The legal team was preparing the criminal case, and district attorneys were already lining up their questions. The last thing I expected was how quickly the world would turn against him. News spread faster than I'd imagined. Within days, the business community was buzzing with whispers and speculation. Greg Whitman, once hailed as a rising star and family man, was now a cautionary tale about greed and betrayal. I followed the headlines with a detached curiosity. His face stared back at me from articles in the Atlantic Journal-Constitution, online blogs, and social media posts. The carefully curated image of the successful businessman was crumbling. The damage extended beyond the company. Word got out that Greg's wife, Marissa, had filed for divorce citing irreconcilable differences and financial misconduct. Friends and family had begun to distance themselves, unsure whether to defend the man they once loved or protect themselves from his fall. At home, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Mother called every evening, her voice trembling between sorrow and anger. "Charles," she said one night, "this has torn the family apart." I didn't try to argue. I knew Greg had been her favorite, always the baby she excused with a gentle smile and indulgent words. But even she couldn't deny the evidence. "She's devastated," I added quietly, thinking of Marissa. "Yes. But she also feels betrayed. It's hard to believe a son of hers could do something so terrible." I remembered those years of small favors, the whispered promises, the forgiveness I'd given Greg when no one else would. The calls for bailouts, the sudden debts he claimed needed paying off. I understood now how those tiny cracks in trust could become chasms. The board asked me to step up as interim CEO. I accepted, though with a heaviness I didn't expect. Taking the reins of the company meant more than just managing logistics and client relationships. It meant healing wounds, repairing client trust, reassuring investors, and managing internal morale. The employees were scared, rumors of layoffs and instability circulated. I held town hall meetings, shared the audit results openly, and promised transparency. Slowly, confidence returned. The company's revenue stabilized. Clients appreciated the openness. But every day I walked into the office, I felt Greg's absence like a shadow, a reminder of what could have been. Then came the call I dreaded but knew was inevitable. Marcus, my investigator, reached out. Charles, Greg's lawyer, called me. They want to negotiate a settlement. I stared at the phone, weighing my options. The money stolen was significant, but chasing every penny in court could take years. Worse, it would drag the family through public mud and mire. I told Marcus to prepare a firm offer, full restitution, public apology, and a commitment from Greg to cease any contact with the company or family business. Anything less, and we'd proceed with criminal charges. A week later, the news hit me like a punch to the gut. Greg had refused. Instead of repenting, he doubled down, hiring a high-powered attorney, flooding the media with counterclaims that I had orchestrated a smear campaign, that I was the true culprit behind the company's troubles. The lines between right and wrong blurred in public perception. Calls from relatives grew colder. Some accused me of betrayal, others whispered about family loyalty and forgiveness. At a rare family dinner, I sat across from Greg's sister, Lisa. "You should have settled quietly," she said, her voice low. "Now you're tearing us apart." I met her gaze steadily. "I didn't tear us apart. Greg did. I'm just holding him accountable." She shook her head. "You think you won. But family is bigger than business." I wondered if she knew the truth. That family meant loyalty, yes, but also honesty, respect, and justice. Days later, I found a letter slipped under my door. No return address. The handwriting was unmistakable. It read, "You won't get away with this forever. People like you always lose in the end." I folded the note carefully and placed it on my desk. For a moment, I felt a flicker of fear, but it passed. Because what Greg didn't understand was that I wasn't the man I'd been 20 years ago, naive, trusting, ready to forgive at every misstep. I was the man who had been tested, betrayed, and risen above the ashes. Late that night, I stood by the window of my study, staring out over the Atlanta skyline. The city was alive with lights, cars, and the quiet pulse of life moving forward. I thought about Greg, the brother I once knew, the man he'd become, and the choices that led us here. Justice was served, yes. But it came at a price. I had lost more than just a sibling. I had lost a vision of family that was never fully real. I thought of the people who had believed in us both, my mother, Ruth, Marcus, and even some old friends who'd stuck by me. Their faith was the foundation on which I would rebuild, not just the company, but my own sense of peace. The road ahead was uncertain. Greg's legal battles promised years of contention. Family gatherings were fractured, tentative, and laced with quiet accusations. But through it all, I held on to one truth. Sometimes, the hardest thing to do is the right thing. And in that, I found a measure of satisfaction. As I closed the blinds that night, I thought back to the first moment I realized I'd been set up. The anger, the disbelief, the hurt, and now, the quiet resolve that had carried me through. I was no longer a victim. I was no longer the man my brother thought he could destroy. I was Charles Whitman, provider, protector, survivor. And this was just the beginning of a new chapter. Thank you for spending your time with my story. Feel free to share your thoughts or reactions in the comments. I'd love to hear from you.